The wind whipped through the open expanse of Silver Ridge, carrying with it the tang of hay, dust, and something electric: anticipation. The crowd in the grandstands leaned forward, as if tethered by some invisible thread to the raw chaos unfolding in the center arena. Hooves pounded against the earth like thunderclaps. People weren't just watching a horse, they were watching a storm with muscle. He was called Thunder for a reason. Sleek as midnight and twice as wild, the stallion bucked furiously against the lead ropes. Two grown men strained to hold him, their boots digging trenches into the dirt as Thunder's muscles rippled with fury. He tossed his head, snorting with a sound like a grenade blast, eyes burning amber beneath the sun. Not a single whip, tranquilizer dart, or digital pressure rain had made a dent in his defiance. Over the loudspeakers, the announcer's voice crackled with faux amusement, masking a tension that made even seasoned trainers in the crowd squirm. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the beast they say can't be tamed, Thunder, brought in from the Nevada high plains, where the only thing more unforgiving than his hooves is his heart. Trust me, he doesn't bow to anyone." A ripple of nervous laughter. Phones rose in unison to capture the moment. In the front row, Karen Cole's hands gripped the arms of her seat as if bracing for impact, but her eyes weren't on Thunder. They were on her son, Ethan, in the wheelchair beside her, staring with unnerving stillness. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. 2 years ago, Ethan had been the Thunder in the ring, the youngest freestyle champion in Colorado equestrian history. Standing ovations, televised interviews, a training invitation from a federal K-9 equine behavioral unit. That was before. Before the metal scraped bone. Before the ATV flipped on that sharp turn outside Elkhorn Pass. Before he woke up with steel rods in his back and silence in his soul. Now he sat in a rigid chair, body still, legs unmoving, and heart chained in a place no physical rehab could reach. Karen leaned closer. "Ethan, are you okay?" He didn't answer. Thunder bucked again, nearly knocking a handler off his feet. The crowd roared. A horse like that didn't belong in a showcase. It belonged in a restricted holding facility, maybe even a military training enclosure. There'd been rumors the Bureau of Wild Equine Management had classified Thunder as potentially defensive grade in archived reports. Words like non-compliant, undomesticated trauma response, and hypersensory resistance had been buried deep in veterinary PDFs that only a few insiders had read. But Ethan had read them. Every word. The announcer cracked another joke, trying to mask the raw, rattled silence. But something in Ethan shifted. He pushed the joystick on his chair and began to move. At first, the whirring of wheels was drowned in the roar of the crowd. But when he veered toward the gate, a collective gasp swept through the bleachers. One of the staff moved to stop him, then hesitated. He was just a kid. What could he do? Karen was at his side in a second. "Ethan, what are you doing?" His eyes never left the stallion. "I need to see him." The handlers backed away from the ropes. One shouted, "Hey, this isn't safe." But Ethan rolled forward, slow, measured. Every click of the motorized chair over gravel was a statement. This wasn't about recklessness. It was about resolve. "What's he think he's doing?" a man muttered nearby. "He's gonna get himself killed," someone else said. "I heard that's the kid who used to win everything," another whispered. "Thought he disappeared." Karen stood frozen, a trembling hand hovering near her chest. Thunder stomped, eyes narrowing at the approaching figure. The giant stallion's ears twitched. His chest heaved, but he didn't buck. Not yet. Ethan stopped 10 feet from the pen. The dust around the wheels settled. He didn't speak at first, didn't gesture. He just watched. And Thunder watched back. 2 worlds suspended in a breath. Karen's voice cracked. "Ethan, come back, please." He held up a hand, silencing her. Stillness. Then Ethan spoke, not loud, not theatrical, soft, honest. "I know what it's like," to lose control. A rustle in the stands, murmurs, laughter from a few teenagers. But most people stopped breathing. Thunder didn't move. He heard him. I didn't ask to be caged either, Ethan continued, his voice low but steady. They put wires in my back, told me I'd never ride again, that my worth ended at the spine. His fingers curled tight on the armrest. I don't believe them. A shift. Thunder's front hoof scratched the dirt. He stepped forward, barely, but it was enough to silence even the announcer. Karen took a step toward the ring. Hank Morgan, standing by the railing, raised a hand to stop her. Don't. Let him speak. Ethan didn't look back. They call you untamable, but maybe you're just misunderstood. Thunder neighed, tossing his mane violently. A child screamed somewhere in the crowd, but Ethan didn't flinch. Or maybe, Ethan whispered, you're just waiting for someone who doesn't try to break you. A tremble ran through the stallion's legs. His ears swiveled forward. He pawed the ground again, but didn't run. A handler gasped. He's lowering his head. Thunder bent, slow as a sunrise. First one knee, then both. A 200-pound warhorse kneeling before a boy in a wheelchair. A soundless explosion ripped through the audience. Cameras clicked. 1,000 people stood, silent. Karen covered her mouth. Ethan breathed out, shoulders lowering. A smile, not for show, not for the crowd, curved at the edge of his lips. Hank's voice was hoarse. In all my years, I've never seen anything like it. Neither had anyone else. In the control booth, a technician tapped the security feed. Should we flag this? Flag it how? The tech pointed. Behavioral override. That's not natural. We have to tag the footage for anomaly detection. The supervisor narrowed her eyes. Send it to the B-32 Behavior Analysis Lab, confidential channel. Back in the arena, Thunder stayed bowed. Ethan rolled forward an inch. The horse didn't react, just waited. I'm not here to conquer you, Ethan said. Just to stand beside you, however we can. Thunder let out a long, steady breath, like an ancient tree exhaling. The spell broke with a single clap, then another. Then waves. The crowd erupted, not in cheer, but awe. Karen stepped forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan, she whispered. But Ethan wasn't listening. His entire being was tethered to the stallion in front of him. And in that silent space between them, something changed. Something elemental. The kind of moment no amount of screen time could reproduce. Not even the best AI emotional modeling tools could replicate the weight of that bond. In the wings, a man in a dark sport coat adjusted his sunglasses. He tapped an earpiece. Sir, he murmured, you need to see this footage. Subject Thunder has shown advanced emotional mirroring. The kid, Ethan Cole, is a variable. There was a pause. Yes. It matches proximity response patterns we saw in the Echo Protocol horse trials. Should we engage? Pause. Understood. Watching. As the last of the applause faded, Ethan wheeled back. Thunder stayed where he was, kneeling, until Ethan turned. Only then did the horse rise, eyes never leaving the boy. Karen reached for her son. That was incredible. He didn't respond. Ethan? He looked up at her, gaze clouded. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for anyone. And then, in a voice just above a whisper, it was for him. Later that night, social media would explode. Headlines would read, Wheelchair teen silences 1,000 with a whisper to a wild horse, and Untamable Stallion kneels for broken boy, crowd weeps. But the real story hadn't begun yet. Because while the world saw a miracle, someone else saw an opportunity. If you've ever felt like the world labeled you wrong, or that you had to earn your place back, leave a comment with number 1 below. Let others know they're not alone. Because next time, Ethan won't just be visiting the ring. He'll be tested inside it, and what's waiting on the other side may not kneel so easily. The morning after the kneeling, Silver Ridge didn't feel real. For Ethan Cole, waking up wasn't a slow return to reality, it was a snap, a jolt, like a switch being thrown in a control panel that hadn't worked in 2 years. He blinked up at the motel ceiling fan and realized, for the first time in ages, that something inside him didn't ache. Not physically, emotionally. But as his chair hummed softly down the breakfast corridor of the lodge, the murmurs caught up with him. That's him. Yeah, the horse kid. No way that was real. I heard Thunder was drugged, micro-pulsed, like DARPA-grade frequency pacers. He rolled past without stopping, his face unreadable. But each word scraped like gravel under skin. Karen stood beside the juice machine, a styrofoam cup trembling in her fingers. She saw the shift in her son's shoulders, that tiny tension returning to his spine. "Ignore them," she said softly. "They don't know what they're talking about." He didn't respond, just stared out the window toward the distant hills. Somewhere out there, Thunder was pacing behind steel fencing, breathing in dust and memories. By noon, the first videos hit the internet, then the interviews, then the edits, zoomed-in frames, slow motion, speculation, pixel-by-pixel scrutiny. On one screen, a YouTube commentator wearing tactical gear pointed dramatically at Ethan's outstretched hand. "Freeze frame right there. See that flick of the wrist? Military-grade non-verbal command training. I've seen this in classified footage from Fort Jackson's K-9 division. You're telling me this kid figured it out on his own?" He laughed. "Come on, people. There's tech involved. There's always tech involved." The comments exploded. "It's a plant. CIA horse whisperer? They're testing mind control on wild stallions now." But the loudest voice wasn't online. It came from a local trainer named Dennis Holt. He'd worked with Thunder during the horse's first week at Silver Ridge, and he was furious. "I don't know what game the Cole kid is playing," Dennis growled into a live news camera outside his barn. "But that horse was unbreakable, violent. We had to sedate him with Class B3 intramusculars just to get him through his medical intake. And now he's kneeling for some teenager in a wheelchair? It doesn't add up." Reporters swarmed. "You're saying it was staged?" "I'm saying it was controlled. Whether by pressure tech, neural tag, or some new behavioral override, I don't know. But what I do know is that the crowd's lucky no one died. That horse isn't healed. He's unpredictable. That moment? That wasn't bonding. That was a glitch." The clip aired nationwide. Ethan watched it from his motel bed in silence. Karen sat beside him, one hand gently curled over his own. He finally spoke. "He thinks I cheated." "No," she said firmly. "He thinks you don't belong. That scares him." "But what if he's right?" Karen turned. "Look at me." He didn't. "Ethan, what happened in that ring wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an illusion. It was you. Something real. Something they couldn't fake if they tried." He shook his head, voice barely audible. "Feels like the world wants me to disappear again." Karen stood, walked to the window. "Then maybe it's time to do the opposite." That afternoon, Ethan rolled through the stables in near silence. Staff parted around him like shadows under high beam. Thunder stood in his enclosure, unshackled but isolated. A placard on the gate now read, "Tier 4 monitoring, non-compliant." Below that, "Behavioral assessment pending, B32 clearance required." B32. He'd seen that code before. It wasn't veterinary, it was defense adjacent. Ethan clicked the latch and entered. "Stop!" a handler barked. "That's restricted." "He knows what he's doing," a low voice said. Hank Morgan emerged from the shade, his broad silhouette framed in dust and wire. "You're back," Hank said, folding his arms. "Should I not be?" "Hell, kid. I've been waiting." They stood in silence as Thunder raised his head and snorted. Not aggressive, just aware. "You didn't train him, did you?" Ethan asked. Hank smiled grimly. "Trained with him. Never got far." He hates pressure, flees from routine, and breaks halters like they're shoelaces. But I didn't do anything. Hank shook his head. That's the point. Ethan looked up. Then why are they saying it's not real? Because what's real scares them. Thunder took a step forward. You've got a choice, Hank said. Let the noise drown you, or give them something they can't ignore. That night, Karen opened an envelope at dinner. Inside, an invitation. State Freestyle Equestrian Exhibition, Youth Companion Division. Special interest entry, Ethan, Cole, and Thunder. What is this? Ethan asked, brow furrowed. Karen smiled gently. Your second round. He shook his head. I can't. I'm not. Not what? Not trained? Not whole? Her voice was soft, but cut like steel. They didn't invite you to prove anything. They invited you because you already did. He looked at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. Hope. The next day, Ethan rolled through the barn to find Thunder waiting at the gate, still, alert. A new camera had been installed above the door, black, unblinking. Below it, a technician in a Silver Ridge windbreaker sat with a tablet. You monitoring him now? Ethan asked. The tech didn't look up. Behavioral sync analysis, sponsored by Ecotech. I didn't sign up for that. You entered the ring. They're watching now. He entered anyway. No ropes, no halter. Thunder watched him, stepped forward. Slowly. Ethan raised a hand. I'm not here to fight. Thunder snorted once, then stilled. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the air between them thickened, electric, like the first second before lightning strikes. Ethan whispered, You're not a monster. You never were. He wheeled back. Thunder followed. 1 step, 2. Then stopped, just inches from Ethan's knees. In the hallway, the Ecotech tablet blinked a new prompt. Untrained behavioral mirroring detected. Risk level, unclassified. The tech blinked, then tapped, Send to B32. By evening, Ethan's phone lit up with an anonymous number. He answered. A low male voice spoke. You've been flagged. What? Thunder's response rate. It matches a pattern from a case shut down 5 years ago. Project Whisper. You're being monitored. Don't go back to the ring tomorrow. Who is this? Click. Dead air. He stared at the screen. Then, slowly, turned toward the arena beyond the stables, where the lights still burned bright under the Colorado dusk. A place that had once broken him. Now, maybe, it could rebuild him. If you think Ethan should enter that ring again, despite the world, despite the cameras, despite the fear, drop a number 2 below. Let's find out how far trust can go before someone tries to break it. Because next time, Ethan won't just meet Thunder. He'll have to prove the bond was never a mistake, and someone in the shadows is counting on him to fail. Silence was supposed to be peaceful, but for Ethan Cole, silence had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't the comforting hush of a quiet room or the stillness before sunrise. It was a vacuum, a kind of weightless suffocation, the kind that pressed against your skull and whispered, You don't belong here. That morning, Silver Ridge wasn't loud anymore. It was whispering. You see the footage from B32? The stabilization software picked up microsignals between the kid and the horse. Spinal tilt synchronization. They're saying his wheelchair might have been broadcasting pulses, something low frequency. That boy? He's not a trainer. He's a case study. Ethan rolled through the back lot behind the stables, trying to avoid the noise that didn't need volume to hurt. His mother, Karen, kept trying to stay close, but he could feel her worry trailing behind him like smoke. Not burning, just thick, hard to breathe through. Everywhere he looked, eyes followed him. Not with awe, not anymore. Now it was suspicion. He reached the fence where Thunder stood beneath the trees, muzzle buried in a bucket of water. The stallion looked up, ears flicking forward at the sound of Ethan's wheels on gravel. A flicker of calm passed between them, but it didn't last. "Cole!" someone barked from behind. It was Dennis Holt. Again. The trainer strode across the yard like he owned the air, a clipboard under one arm, a fresh scar above his right eyebrow. He stopped 5 feet away, boots kicking dust between them. "You planning to pull another stunt in front of an audience?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "That wasn't a stunt." Dennis sneered. "So what was it then? Magic? A miracle?" "It was trust." Dennis scoffed. "Trust doesn't override predatory reflexes. That horse has a history. 10 incidents flagged at intake. He's a Tier 4 classified risk. I've seen handlers get concussed trying to get him to move 2 feet. Ethan didn't blink. "Maybe you weren't listening the right way." "Listening?" Dennis stepped closer. "Let me be clear, kid. If you get back in that ring and something goes wrong, I am the one who has to explain it to the Equine Behavior Board. Not you. Not your mom. Me." Karen appeared from behind the stable doors. "Is that a threat?" "No, ma'am. That's a warning." He turned and walked away. The silence after he left was heavier than any shouting. That evening, Ethan sat in his motel room scrolling through notifications. The video had now passed 4.2 million views. A slow-motion clip of thunder kneeling had been dissected by half a dozen internet specialists, each claiming different causes. One influencer paused the frame where Thunder first reacted to Ethan. "Now watch here, frame 274. See that ripple across the shoulder muscles? That's a known response pattern to ultrasonic signaling, most likely in the sub-12 Hz range, used in military applications for canine trauma reconditioning. Check the 2019 white paper from Quantometrics." Below, the comments flared. "So they're testing tech on horses now? This kid's being used, wake up." "It's staged, controlled, probably linked to DARPA's Echo protocol." Another video alleged Ethan had a small device embedded in the armrest of his wheelchair. The creator circled an innocuous bump with bright red lines. "Right there. Could be a transmission port, possibly repurposed from a digital rain system. Think Gen 3 control deck like they used in the Southeast Asia ops, just civilianized." Ethan closed the app. His breath came faster than he wanted. He stared at the ceiling, counted the cracks in the paint. Anything to slow the pulse in his neck. A knock broke the spiral. Karen peeked in. "Honey, there's someone here to see you." Ethan wheeled out slowly. Hank stood under the lobby light, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "I brought something," the trainer said. Ethan followed him to the truck parked out back. Inside the bed was a dusty metal case marked United States Defense Equine Unit. Karen's jaw tightened. "Where did you get this?" "Borrowed," Hank said. "Officially, this never left the base. Unofficially, well, I figured you should know what people are accusing you of using." He unlatched the case. Inside were 6 devices: headbands, pulse pads, microtransmitters, all labeled in military codes. One read, B32 RTS, Reactive Trust Simulation. Ethan stared. "This is what they think I had?" "They're wrong," Hank said. "But that doesn't matter to them. They've already made you a symbol." "For what?" "For whatever scares them most." Thunder wasn't in the ring the next morning. Instead, he was gone. Ethan didn't panic at first, just confusion, a slow creep of disbelief. He checked the barn, the outer pens, the field. Nothing. When he asked a staffer, they shrugged. Trainer Holt said he was being transported for medical scans. Said you knew. I didn't. Karen called the front office. No record of a medical transport. When Ethan checked the live cameras in the facility's online access portal, Thunder's pen showed a time-stamped loop from last night. A playback. It wasn't live. Someone had swapped the feed. And then, a message. It blinked across the admin interface like a glitch. A single line, Don't look where you're not invited. B32. He showed it to Hank. The older man's jaw tensed. They're trying to erase the moment, frame it as error or manipulation. You got too close to something they wanted controlled. Ethan's fingers curled into fists on his wheels. Then we bring it into the light. That night, he posted a video. No music, no effects, just him, a chair, a voice. My name is Ethan Cole. I didn't ask for fame, for footage, or for attention. I asked for connection. I spoke to a creature no one believed could listen. And he listened. He paused, swallowed. Now they've taken him. He uploaded it. The views soared past 500,000 in 4 hours. By morning, a groundskeeper found Thunder, locked in an old transport trailer behind the vet lab, barely ventilated, surrounded by half-empty IV bags and tech gear marked Empathic Response Recording, Classified. Ethan stood at the edge of the open doors and looked Thunder in the eyes. The horse didn't buck, didn't scream. He simply blinked, like he was waiting. A hum pulsed from inside the trailer, an ultrasonic wave barely audible to human ears. Hank pulled the plug from a power strip bolted into the wall. The noise stopped. Thunder exhaled like a prisoner released from some unseen grip. Karen dialed the press. They weren't going to erase this. If you've ever had something stolen not by force but by doubt, by whispers, you know this feeling. Leave a 3 in the comments if you've been there, and if you haven't, stay with us. Because what happens next will be heard in every corner where silence was once weaponized. Ethan's about to enter the noise again, but this time he's bringing proof. The air tasted like copper and dust. Ethan rolled through the open gate into the holding pen where Thunder had once been kept, and all that remained was the echo of hooves and a trail of disturbed straw. The sky overhead was wide and unforgiving, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dry dirt lot. No audience now, no crowd, just space, and the truth trying to claw its way through the silence. Thunder had been found, yes, but not returned. The Stallion had been placed into solitary reassessment, moved from the public arena to an isolated back corral under observation. There were signs everywhere now. Bio-tracking active, ecotech access only, and do not engage without clearance, B32 authorization required. B32. That label again. Every time Ethan saw it, something cold brushed the back of his neck. He parked his wheelchair just outside the corral fence and waited. It took a full minute before Thunder stepped out from behind the shade of a large wooden panel. The Stallion was different now, not visibly injured, not overtly hostile, but something in the way his body moved felt off. There was a tension in the muscles around his neck, a kind of coiled fatigue that hadn't been there before. "Hey, boy," Ethan said softly, leaning forward. "You okay?" Thunder didn't respond. Not the usual ear flick, not the low breath, just stillness. Karen stood a few feet back, arms crossed. "They've done something to him." Ethan didn't speak. Instead, he slowly reached into his side pouch and pulled out a laminated photo. It was taken 3 days ago, mid-performance. The exact moment Thunder had bowed his head in the arena. He held it up. Thunder didn't move. Then, suddenly, the Stallion blinked. Once, then again. His front hoof twitched. Ethan lowered the photo, and Thunder took a step forward. "See that?" Karen whispered. But Ethan didn't look away. He was watching Thunder's eyes, the way they darted, not at him, but around him, as if something else was watching too. Later that night, Ethan sat with Hank in the tool shed-turned office behind the stables. Thunder's enclosure was visible through the window, lit by 2 halogen posts and a faint red blink from the Ecotech cameras above. "They're watching everything," Hank said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Not just the horse, you too." "I know. You ever ask what B32 actually is?" Ethan looked up. "It's not just a code," Hank continued. Back in 2011, there was a joint defense study, equine human neural interface trials. Small unit out of Fort Carson worked with DARPA and 2 private labs. One of them was B-32. What were they testing? Trust. Hank sipped. Not the emotional kind, the engineered kind. Ethan's stomach turned. Karen stepped in, holding a manila envelope. I went digging through some old vet records they left in Thunder's folder. Found this. Inside the envelope were medical logs, transfer reports, scans, one stuck out. Subject, Thunder Registry Tag, W672D previous owner, unlisted implant procedure, cervical region, classified. Approval code, D46A, neurobehavioral reflex. Implant, revoked. Ethan stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves if he blinked hard enough. Implant, cervical, neurobehavioral. Wait, he said. Are you saying they put something in him? Karen said, her voice trembling. A device. It's not there now, Hank said. They pulled it after the last showcase. But why? Ethan asked. If they wanted to keep controlling him, why remove it? Karen looked down. Because you made him move without it. That night, Ethan wheeled back to the corral alone. He stopped at the fence and waited. Thunder stood under the far floodlight, motionless. Ethan whispered, I don't care what they did to you before. I'm not here to use you. I just want to be here with you. It was a long time before Thunder moved. But when he did, it wasn't a sprint or a charge. It was a slow, deliberate walk. Dust rose in quiet clouds around his legs. The way he approached, no handler, no reins, just instinct, felt like something ancient being remembered. Ethan didn't reach out. He just whispered, I missed you. Thunder blinked slowly. A minute passed. Then Thunder lowered his head. The motion was different from the showcase. Slower, heavier, like each inch cost something. But he did it. He came close enough that Ethan could hear the breath through his nostrils, and then he exhaled onto Ethan's chest. A soft gust of warm air. Connection. In the bushes nearby, someone lowered a small handheld recorder and clicked, Stop. They slipped away into the night. The next morning, Ethan found a package taped to the front of the stable door. No name, no return label. Inside, a thumb drive and a sticky note that read, If you're serious, you need to see what came before. He plugged the drive into Hank's office computer. The folder contained 8 files, labeled Subject 01, Failure, Fatal. Subject 02, Partial Submission. Subject 03, Reluctant Trust, 6-week cycle. Subject 07, Rejection Reflex, Audio Override Breach. Subject E08, Thunder, W672D, Uncontrolled Autonomy, Case closed. Each file was video. He clicked the last one. It opened to grainy footage, Thunder in a cage, a handler shouting commands, electrical pads near the neck. Thunder bucked violently, smashed into the steel fencing. Blood. Screams. And then the lights cut out. When they came back on, the horse was kneeling, not peacefully, defeated. Ethan yanked the drive. He couldn't breathe. What they did to him, he said. It wasn't training. It was war. Karen touched his shoulder. And you're undoing it. But something was gnawing at him now. Why did they stop? Why now, after everything, were they pulling back? Unless they weren't. Unless they were waiting. That evening, Ethan stepped into the empty arena after hours. No audience, no staff, just him and the dry wind rolling across the bleachers. He called once. Thunder came through the gate, alone. No one sent him. He chose it. Ethan wheeled toward the center. Thunder followed. In that moment, it wasn't about resistance or control. It was about memory. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral. A return to the dust where you were first broken, just to rise again. Ethan reached out a hand. Thunder didn't flinch. He moved closer, and rested his muzzle in Ethan's open palm. Above them, a security camera light blinked red. Inside the facility's monitoring room, a man in uniform leaned forward. "Sir," a tech said, "should I tag this under anomaly code?" The man studied the screen. "No," he replied. "Tag it under proof of deviation." "Understood." The screen blinked. B-32 override command. Initiate relocation protocol. 0600 hours. No public access, no press, full blackout. Back in the arena, Ethan whispered something no one else could hear. "You're not what they made you. You're what you chose to become." Thunder breathed. Dust rose. And somewhere, someone opened a case marked Echo Tech Module, refit ready. If you believe that healing means confronting what broke you first, drop a number 4 in the comments. Because the next time Ethan walks into that arena, he may not be allowed to leave with Thunder, and someone is preparing to make sure of it. The invitation came in a crisp white envelope, but the moment Ethan touched it, it felt like holding a live wire. It had been slipped under their motel door. No fanfare, no name, just a gold seal and a line of embossed text. Colorado State Freestyle Equestrian Championship, Companion Division, to Ethan Cole. Entry accepted, exhibition slot confirmed. He didn't open it at first, just stared at it like it might explode. Karen picked it up, turning it over with careful fingers. "It's real." "How?" he asked. "I didn't apply." "You didn't have to." She handed him a printout folded inside the envelope. A handwritten note had been scrawled across the top in blue ink. "We've seen what you and Thunder can do. Some things don't need formal submission, they just need to be seen." Freestyle Board. Division C. Ethan swallowed. Companion Division was usually reserved for therapeutic riders. Kids working with specially trained horses. Retired veterans rebuilding trust. It was quiet. Gentle. Meant to showcase bond, not spectacle. But Ethan didn't ride Thunder. He moved beside him. No reins, no saddle, no handler whispering commands from the fence line. It had never been about control. Now the world wanted to see it again. Karen sat across from him that evening, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Her eyes were distant, thoughtful. "I competed in that same division once," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up. "You did?" She nodded. "Back when I was 17, my maiden name was on the roster, Karen Monroe. I still remember the arena, the smell of the sawdust, the way your heartbeat feels louder than the applause." He smiled faintly. "Did you win?" She laughed. "I fell off, right in front of the judges, but I got back up." Her face turned serious. "That's what this is for you. Not about winning, about standing up." He didn't respond. Not yet. Because beneath the memory, something darker was crawling its way back in. Thunder's scans, the B-32 logo, the quiet way someone tried to erase what they couldn't explain. What if the showcase wasn't a celebration? What if it was a trap? That night, Ethan wheeled out to the field under the stars. Thunder stood near the edge of the fence, tail flicking in rhythm with the breeze. "I got us invited," Ethan said. Thunder looked up. "But I don't know if we're ready." The stallion stepped closer. Ethan didn't say more. He didn't need to, because the wind had already answered. The news broke 2 days later. Ethan Cole and Thunder would be the first ever non-mounted team to perform in the state companion division. The media blitz was instantaneous. Some headlines praised him. "Boy in wheelchair redefines equestrian trust. From dust to destiny. Ethan and Thunder return." Others weren't so kind. "Publicity stunt or unsafe spectacle. Unregulated duo invited without ADA clearance. Senator requests review." That last one hit hardest. Senator Abigail Cross, chair of the State Safety Committee, called for a formal inquiry. "We must evaluate if this participant meets the legal and medical prerequisites for animal performance interactions, per Clause 46A, of the Companion Exhibition Act. Clause 46A. A rule originally written to prevent animal exploitation after a teenage boy with PTSD had collapsed mid-performance 5 years ago. Ethan had read the file, memorized it even. Now they were citing it. Against him. Karen slammed the laptop shut when the video ended. This is a political game. They think I'm unstable, Ethan said. No, she corrected. They think you're uncontrollable. Later that evening, Ethan found Hank leaning on the fence, a cigarette tucked behind his ear and a folder in his hands. This yours? Hank asked, tossing it over. Inside were typed records, schedules, vet clearances, performance waivers. One line stood out. Ecotech personnel authorized for on-site observation. Behavior analysis, B32 live link enabled. They're watching? Ethan asked. They're waiting, Hank said, to see if you fail, if he bucks, if anything gives them permission to say, see, we were right. So what do I do? You show them what they can't measure. You show them why they're wrong. The arena at the state championship was 3 times the size of Silver Ridge. Ethan rolled through the south gate 2 days before the event, Thunder following behind. The stallion wore no bridle, no saddle, just muscle and silence. As they entered, dozens of riders turned to stare. Some whispered, some pointed. Is that him? The kid from the video? Why isn't anyone stopping him? They moved across the field like a ripple of disbelief. And then came the voice. That's far enough. A woman in a gray blazer and a high-neck badge stepped into view. Ethan Cole? She asked. He nodded. I'm Camille Dyer, ADA Enforcement Liaison. I need to conduct a risk assessment before your team proceeds. Karen stepped forward. That's not in the invitation terms. Correct, Camille said calmly. But Senator Cross filed an emergency petition last night. The state approved it. If your son doesn't pass the clearance today, he doesn't perform. Ethan looked her dead in the eye. Then assess us. The test took an hour. Obstacle simulations. Loud sounds, rapid movement, flashing lights. Thunder never flinched. At one point, a pop of compressed air startled a neighboring horse into rearing. Thunder stepped toward Ethan. Not away. Camille closed her clipboard. I'll file the clearance. But her eyes were troubled. Before she left, she leaned close. They're not worried about the horse. They're worried about the crowd. The night before the performance, Ethan sat alone in the barn with Thunder. He could hear the buzz of lights, the murmur of trainers, the sound of thunder, not hooves, but real sky rumble overhead. You know what happens if we screw this up, right? He said. Thunder blinked. They'll shut it all down. Say you're a fluke, that I'm a fraud. He touched Thunder's muzzle. But if we do this? Right. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. The morning of the exhibition, the stands were packed. Thousands of people, journalists, critics. One section marked Reserved ADA Panel, Ethics Review. Karen hugged him tightly behind the curtain. Whether he walks beside you or not, she whispered, you've already done the impossible. Ethan rolled into the light. Thunder followed. And for a moment, the crowd didn't make a sound. They watched. Because something was different. Not just the sight of a boy in a wheelchair and a wild stallion without reins. It was the stillness between them. The trust. No cues. No showmanship. Just motion. A song began to play. An old instrumental Karen had chosen. Soft cello like wind through pine trees. Ethan didn't lead. He moved. And Thunder matched him. Each turn. Each stop. Each breath. When Ethan raised his hand, Thunder reared. Soft, controlled, not wild. When Ethan lowered his eyes, Thunder kneeled. The crowd was breathless, and somewhere in the front row, Senator Cross sat motionless, her mouth slightly parted. When it ended, the arena stayed silent. And then the applause came. It was a slow build, a rising wave, not polite, thunderous. But Ethan didn't hear it. He was watching Thunder, the way the Stallion looked back at him, calm, centered. And then Thunder turned, head high, tail flicking. Behind the stands, someone closed a laptop. "Performance recorded," a man whispered into a hidden mic. "Data captured, no anomalies." Another voice replied, cold and distant. "Good. Begin the next phase, quietly. Because when the crowd leaves and the lights go out, not all arenas stay empty. Some become battlegrounds. If you believe Ethan should keep going, no matter how loud the world tries to silence him, drop a number 3 in the comments. Because next time, it won't just be a performance. It might be his last chance to keep Thunder safe. Trust doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It walks beside you, quietly. But sometimes, silence becomes a battlefield. Ethan Cole stood on the threshold of the Silver Ridge Corral as the sky broke open in a dry thunderstorm. The kind that rumbled without rain. The kind that mirrored the noise building inside him. 2 days had passed since the freestyle performance. 2 days of headlines, 2 days of press, and 2 days of waiting for a response, waiting for the silence from B-32 to break. It finally did. At 3:17 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot behind the stable. No lights, no plates. Karen saw it from the motel window. She called Ethan. He was already awake. By the time they reached the barn, Thunder was gone. The gate was open. The halter was on the ground. A set of tire tracks led into the woods behind the training field. "Not stolen," Hank said, crouching over the prints. "Extracted. Who would? Someone with clearance." Ethan's hands shook. They didn't even try to hide it. "They didn't need to," Karen said coldly. "Not when they think they own him." That morning, a letter arrived at the event office. From Bureau of Equine Risk Management, Facility B-32. Subject, Asset Retrieval Notification. Status, W672D has been secured for reassessment following deviation from expected neurobehavioral metrics. Access revoked. Further inquiry pending under Clause 46A. No warning, no appeal. Thunder was classified again, not as a partner, as property. "They're going to erase him," Ethan said, clutching the paper. "Erase what we did, what we proved." Hank's voice was low. "Unless you go louder than they ever expected." Ethan didn't respond immediately, because he knew what that meant. The State Ethics Board was holding its quarterly review in Denver, 50 miles east. On the surface, the agenda was standard: ADA access updates, bioethics violations, safety protocols. But tucked near the bottom of the schedule, 10:30 a.m. Special inquiry, behavioral modulation, equine companion subjects, B-32 program review. Karen pulled up the live stream on her laptop. As the camera zoomed in, the board chair spoke. "Our next discussion regards the recent reclassification of animal subject W672D and the ethics surrounding data collection and exhibition exposure. We've received petitions from both public advocacy groups and private defense advisors." "Private defense?" Ethan asked. "Why is defense even in the room?" Hank's jaw tightened. "Because what you did with Thunder, that bond, it wasn't supposed to happen. And now it's being labeled unstable." They watched as a man in a sharp black blazer stood to speak. He introduced himself as Dr. Julian Vance, neuroethics consultant, formerly with Ecotech, and now working as a behavioral science liaison for B-32. "Thunder is a unique case," Vance said. "Our concern is not with the boy, but with the precedent. Uncontrolled emotional synchronization between human and subject leads to behavioral risk. We don't know where the boundary lies." "But you tried to define it," Karen muttered. On the live stream, one of the ethics members interrupted. "So what's the proposal?" Vance straightened. "Terminate the subject." The room went still. "Wait. Are you saying euthanize?" "Either physically, Vance replied, or neurologically. Karen covered her mouth. They can't be serious, Ethan whispered. But no one on the screen objected. That evening, Ethan called a press conference. Just outside the fence where Thunder had once stood, he faced a sea of cameras. He spoke only 3 sentences. You stole him. You said trust was dangerous. Now the world gets to decide if you're right. And then he rolled away. The video went viral within hours. Petitions flooded the state site. Protesters gathered outside the B-32 entrance in northern Colorado. Advocacy groups launched campaigns titled, "Let Them Choose" and "Trust is Not a Threat." And still, no word. Until 2:12 a.m., Ethan's phone vibrated with a restricted number. He answered. You have 12 hours, a voice said. Come alone, no press, no footage. You want him back? Prove it wasn't luck. Click. Dead air. Karen begged him not to go. Hank offered to drive with him. But Ethan knew what this was. They were trying to corner him, not with threats, with choice. He rode alone. Just before sunrise, he reached the gated facility, marked only by a numeric keypad and a rusted sign. B-32, Animal Behavioral Systems, Restricted Entry. He pressed the intercom. The gate clicked. A woman in a white lab coat led him through a glass hallway where the lights flickered like an old airport. The walls were lined with framed certificates and photographs, each one showcasing a different animal. Dogs, falcons, horses, each one labeled subject. Thunder's photo was last. A black and white still of him mid-buck, wild, untouched, not kneeling, not connected. Come this way, the woman said. He entered a round room with mirrored walls. At its center, Thunder. No halter, no muzzle, but around his neck was a new band. Ethan knew the make. It was a behavioral override device. B-32 Delta Collar, high-frequency trigger system used only in defense-grade canine units. Take it off, Ethan said. A voice behind the glass replied, Not yet. It was Vance. This is your test, Ethan. Ethan rolled forward, eyes locked on the Stallion. Thunder pawed the ground once, twice. Do nothing, Vance said, and he stays with us. Try something reckless and we shut it all down. Ethan breathed in. Thunder, he whispered. The horse looked up, and for a second, just a second, Ethan saw it. Recognition. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. A piece of rope. Frayed. Torn from the first halter they'd ever used. Thunder had shredded it within hours, but Ethan had kept the piece anyway. A reminder of where they started. He held it out. Thunder's ears twitched. Don't move, Vance barked through the intercom. But Ethan wheeled forward. Thunder didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped. Toward Ethan. One step, then another. The collar blinked. Ethan stopped breathing. Thunder reached him and lowered his head. The room didn't erupt. The glass didn't shatter. But something did break. The lie. That trust had to be forced. That connection could be controlled. Thunder stood still, waiting. Ethan whispered, Now take it off. Vance didn't move. Karen's voice rang from the lobby over the security feed. Take it off, or we take this public. The lights flickered, and then the collar clicked open. It fell to the ground like a shackle broken. Thunder didn't move. He didn't flee. He just pressed his head gently into Ethan's shoulder, in silence. Because trust doesn't scream. It simply stays. Outside, as they exited into the wind, a crowd had gathered beyond the fences. They didn't cheer. They didn't chant. They stood in silence, watching a boy in a chair and a horse without a rope walk through the dust, together. Somewhere inside, Vance closed a file marked Termination Order, W672D. He erased it. But he did not forget. And neither will those who believe freedom must be designed, not chosen. If you believe trust should never be treated like a threat, drop a number 6 in the comments. Because they may have removed the collar. But B32 isn't done watching. And next time, they may not come for the horse. You'd think the hardest part was over after they removed the collar. But the hardest part was what came after the silence. It started with a single tweet from a verified defense consultant. What if the real danger isn't the horse, but the boy? The post went viral in 3 hours. By morning, 3 national anchors were already debating it live. They didn't use Ethan's name, but they didn't need to. A disabled teen with no military training somehow synchronizes with a Tier 4 classified stallion, and we're just letting that go? Within 48 hours, the term neurobond risk began trending on Think Defense Net forums. A photo of Thunder resting his head on Ethan's shoulder was repurposed into a cautionary infographic titled Unregulated Trust Loop, Unstable Response Model. It looked scientific. It sounded terrifying. It was also, by all accounts, completely fabricated. But the wave had started, and it was relentless. At first, Ethan tried to ignore it. He focused on Thunder's rehabilitation, on repairing the micro tears in the stallion's rear tendons from months of stress. He helped Hank recondition the corral footing, replaced all the straw in the old stalls. He kept moving until the death threats started coming in, anonymous, cowardly, typed in all caps. Put that animal down before it snaps and kills him. B32 failed for a reason. This kid is a liability. You think this is cute? Wait till a child gets hurt. Karen shut down Ethan's inbox, deleted his public accounts. But by then, it was too late. B32 issued an official statement through Ecotech. While we respect the emotional significance of the boy's connection with W672D, we do not condone the unauthorized removal of military origin equipment from secure facilities. We urge caution. Trust is not a replacement for containment. Then came the lawsuit, filed under Clause 46A, subsection D, reckless public display of reclassified behavioral test subjects. It named both Ethan Cole and Karen Monroe Cole as defendants. Damages, $1.3 million. The charge? Endangering public safety via unlicensed engagement with a known neuroinstability risk asset. It didn't matter that Thunder hadn't harmed anyone. It didn't matter that the collar had been removed with B32's own override code. All that mattered was fear. Fear had traction. Fear sold faster than truth. The first court hearing was scheduled for 30 days later, but the attack came before that. It happened on a Thursday morning. Thunder had been led into the southern paddock, his favorite spot, close to the low ridge where the wind rolled clean off the canyon. Ethan had wheeled out early, hoping for a quiet moment, but instead, he heard the drone, literally. A black quadcopter buzzed over the fence line, low and erratic. Thunder jerked his head up, ears pinned. The device swooped once, twice, then dipped low, shining a light directly into Thunder's face. It wasn't random. It was a harassment drone, high-frequency burst emitter, typically used in wildlife dispersal operations. Karen screamed from the porch. Ethan wheeled forward. Thunder reared, and just as the drone surged down a final time, a rock shot through the air, launched from Hank's slingshot. The drone cracked midair, spun, and exploded into the dirt. The smoke that rose smelled of burned circuitry. Thunder was shaking, but he didn't run. He stepped back toward Ethan. That image, caught by one of the reporters who had returned to cover the fallout, would later be dubbed the moment he chose. And yet, despite that choice, the backlash only escalated. That night, Ecotech filed an injunction, requesting immediate seizure of Thunder, this time not for reassessment, but for permanent deactivation. Karen met with the lawyer 2 days later. His name was Preston Lee, young, sharp, and fierce. He looked at the documents, then looked at Ethan. They want to label you a biothreat, he said. Not the horse. You. Ethan blinked. Why? Because if you're a threat, they don't have to explain the collar, the drone, The fact that no one filed a missing animal report. If they can redefine the terms of connection as instability, they don't have to face accountability. He closed the folder. And because if you win, it changes everything. The state judge allowed the hearing to move forward, but imposed a shocking condition. Thunder could not be present in court. The justification? Clause 46A Emergency Protocol, pending technical safety verification. In other words, he was being caged again, physically and legally. Ethan stood in the barn with Thunder the night before the trial. He laid a hand on the horse's neck and whispered, "They're trying to turn us into something we're not." Thunder exhaled, slow and steady. "They don't understand," Ethan said. "Trust isn't some code. It's not programmable." He stepped back. "I'm going to tell them that tomorrow." He paused. "I just don't know if they'll listen." Thunder didn't blink, didn't shift. But something in the way he stayed, in that stillness, was louder than any speech. The courtroom was full the next morning. Reporters, ethics board members, defense advisors, even 2 Ecotech executives in suits that didn't wrinkle. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table beside Karen and Preston. The opposing counsel began with an aggressive slide presentation. Photos, diagrams, one labeled, "Trust Loop Model Instability Risk, Case 17. Another showed the neuro-override collar. "This device," the prosecutor said, "was removed without clearance, exposing the public to a classified biobehavioral experiment whose neural imprint signatures are still unresolved." Karen leaned toward Preston. "What does that even mean?" "It means they don't like that Thunder chose him." Then they brought up him, Dr. Julian Vance, in a neatly tailored suit. The same voice Ethan had heard through the glass now stood at the witness stand and calmly explained why trust was a chemical illusion. "Bonding behavior," he said, "is measurable, manipulable, and, if unregulated, becomes unstable." Ethan Cole's continued unsupervised proximity to W672D demonstrates an egregious breach of containment protocol. Ethan stood. Judge Miriam Black looked down over her glasses. "Mr. Cole, do you have something to add?" He nodded and rolled forward. "I'm not a handler," he said. "I'm not a scientist. I'm just a kid who couldn't walk for 2 years, who didn't speak for 1. And when the world thought I was broken, a horse no one believed in walked toward me." He paused. "Not because of programming, not because of a collar." He held up the rope. "Because I listened." There was silence, until the judge finally asked, "Do you believe this connection poses a risk?" Ethan looked up, only to the systems that are afraid of it. That afternoon, the judge delayed her ruling. And that night, someone cut the fence. Thunder was gone again. But this time, it wasn't an extraction. It was a message. On the gate was a spray-painted phrase in red, "Trust is a threat." If you believe trust is not a threat, drop a number 7 in the comments, because next time we find Thunder, it may already be too late. The hoofprints ended in dry gravel. No blood, no struggle, just a pattern of steps that faded into dust, like Thunder had walked out of the world itself. Ethan stared at the open gate, the words, "Trust is a threat," still fresh in red paint, dripping like a wound that hadn't finished bleeding. Karen's voice cracked behind him. "They took him again." But Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, this wasn't them." "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "B-32 wouldn't leave a message." "Not like this." Hank arrived seconds later, shotgun in hand, not loaded to fire, loaded to warn. His boots hit the earth heavy as truth. "They used a noise box," he muttered, crouching over a patch of disturbed dirt. "Look at the hoof spread. See that splay? Thunder was running. Away. From what? I don't know, but it wasn't someone leading him." Ethan knelt, slowly, carefully, next to the tracks. He reached out and touched the edge of a print with his fingers. The dirt was still warm. "Less than 2 hours," he said. He can't be far. Karen turned toward the barn. I'll call the sheriff. But Hank didn't move. They won't help. Why not? He stood slowly. Because they're scared of being tied to a creature the government labeled a liability. Ethan's voice was flat. They're scared of trust. The next 48 hours blurred into chaos. The media jumped on the disappearance. The same networks that had once heralded Thunder as a miracle now called him a security risk at large. One headline read, "Vanishing hooves, neuro-bonded horse escapes, is America safe?" The mayor of Silver Ridge issued a public statement urging citizens not to engage with the animal if sighted. Multiple callers phoned into talk radio claiming Thunder had trampled crops, broken fences, spooked livestock. Most of them were false, but fear didn't care about accuracy. Meanwhile, Ethan and Hank created their own search grid. Each night, they mapped new sectors of open land. Ethan used satellite overlays on an old iPad, layered with hoof patterns and wind direction estimates. "We're dealing with a smart animal," Hank said. "He'll avoid towns. Water will be his key." That led them to Mill Creek. Mill Creek wasn't marked on most maps anymore. Once part of a military testing site in the 80s, the land had been sold to a biotech startup in 2009. Now it was overgrown with weeds and half-buried concrete structures, most of which hadn't been touched since a failed drought monitoring initiative. But Hank had heard rumors. Back in 2021, he told Ethan, Ecotech leased part of this land for low-frequency behavior testing, near-liminal audio mapping, something to do with drone animal interface loops. Military grade? Worse, private. They arrived at dusk. The air was thick with static. Not noise, just pressure. Like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Ethan wheeled up the cracked concrete road as the first structure appeared, a half-collapsed shed marked B32 FAC Subnode 3. Karen followed behind, flashlight in hand, every step a question she wasn't ready to ask. Then, Hank froze. "Over there." In the tall grass by the fence, the blades were flattened, wide and deep. Hoof prints, fresh. Karen gasped. "Thunder?" But Ethan raised a hand. Because something was wrong. The pattern wasn't Thunder's usual cadence. The spacing was off, shorter, panicked, and then he saw it, a smear of blood on the broken fence post, fresh, still dark. "No," Ethan whispered. He pushed forward, fast, across the gravel into the open clearing beyond the structure. And there, in the center of the field, was a rusted trailer, wired shut. Inside, it wasn't Thunder. It was another horse, eyes wide, frothing at the mouth, collapsed on one leg, a B-32 collar still fused into the flesh of its neck. Karen gasped and turned away. Ethan stared. Etched into the metal near the base of the trailer was a phrase, "Subject failed neural recall. Status terminated." "What is this place?" Ethan whispered. Hank walked up, grim. "A graveyard." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat in the motel, replaying every movement, every hoofprint, every breath Thunder had taken in their last moment together. Then he opened his email. There was a message. No name, no subject, just a GPS pin and a 5-word sentence. "He's not dead, not yet." Attached was a photo. Thunder, alive, but in a cage, his coat slick with sweat, his eyes dim, his head lowered, but not by choice. Behind him, lab lights, blue gloves, a reflection of a man in a military-grade neural regulator headset. "Where is that?" Karen asked, rushing to his side. Ethan loaded the coordinates. It was a facility 120 miles south, listed on old maps as Fort Nellis Sublevel 3, officially decommissioned in 2007. But the satellite image showed vehicles, heat signatures, and one other thing, an Ecotech logistics tag embedded into the side fencing. They drove through the night. Just before dawn, they reached the perimeter. Chain link fence, barbed wire, a no-entry classified sign half rusted off. Ethan turned to Hank. "I'm going in." "No way in hell," Karen snapped. "You saw what they did to that other horse. You don't even know what's waiting on the inside." "I know exactly what's waiting." He looked at her. "Thunder didn't run. He was taken. And if I leave him again, I don't deserve the trust he gave me." Silence. Then Hank spoke. "I know a way in." The tunnel was a runoff culvert, 4 feet wide, pitch black. It led beneath the south wing of the compound, connected to a service corridor labeled Bio-Waste, No Entry. They moved slow. Ethan dragged his chair behind him, crawling through the dust, the stench of chemicals stinging his eyes. When they emerged into the sublevel, the world changed. It wasn't a lab, it was a theater. Glass rooms, chrome floors, electrodes lining the walls, and in the center of it all, Thunder. Suspended in a frame, legs bound in biometric cuffs, wires trailing from his skull to a terminal labeled B32 Neuralink V7, replay capture mode. Ethan's breath caught. "What are they doing to him?" Karen whispered. Hank scanned the interface. "They're trying to extract the bond." Ethan blinked. "What?" "Replay the trust loop, stimulate it, map it, then transfer it." "To who?" "To someone they control." Then a voice filled the air, cold, measured. "Well, you finally made it." Vance stepped from behind a panel, flanked by 2 Ecotech operatives in black suits. Ethan stood his ground. "You said he was unstable." "I said he was unpredictable," Vance replied. "But that's precisely what made him valuable." "You lied. You said he was a threat." "He is," Vance said, "to every system we've spent years building. But now, he's data. And data can be owned." He gestured to the console. "Unless you want to lose him permanently, I suggest you give us the one thing we haven't been able to duplicate." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You want me to betray the trust?" "I want you to repeat it, on cue, so we can isolate the sequence." Ethan stared at Thunder. The Stallion didn't move, but his eyes met Ethan's, and in that gaze, there was pain, but not surrender. Ethan took a step forward. Karen grabbed his arm. "Don't! I'm not going to give them the loop," he whispered. "Then what?" "I'm going to break it." He turned to Vance. "Let me in the cage." Denied. "You want data?" Ethan said, stepping forward. "Then let me try, or this all dies here." A pause. Then Vance nodded. 5 minutes. They unlatched the cage. Ethan stepped in slowly. Thunder didn't react. Ethan raised his hand, shaking, breath caught. "I'm here." Nothing. He stepped closer. "They can't take what we had." No response. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." And then he did the only thing he hadn't tried. He turned his back and sat down, facing away, silent, still. After 20 seconds, Thunder moved, 1 step, then another, and then his head dropped onto Ethan's shoulder. Every monitor in the room flatlined. No brainwave spike, no neural recall, just stillness and trust. Vance's eyes widened. "No," Ethan whispered. "You don't get to own this." And then Thunder screamed, not in pain, but in rage. The cuffs snapped, wires flared, monitors shattered, Thunder reared, and the room went dark. If you believe some bonds are worth breaking everything for, drop a number 8. Because Thunder's hooves didn't vanish. They came back. And they came back fighting. It wasn't the explosion that woke him. It was the silence afterward. Ethan's ears rang from the blast. Glass, alarms, men shouting in panic. But somewhere inside that chaos was something far more terrifying. The sound of thunder, not moving. He blinked through smoke and ash, his body pinned beneath a fallen support beam. Thunder's frame, seconds earlier so powerful and defiant, now lay slumped beside the neural rig, a tangle of wires around his legs. No twitch, No breath. No spark. Karen was yelling his name from the far end of the room, Hank's silhouette dragging her out as security forces rushed in from every corner. Someone screamed for medical evac, another for lockdown on all doors. But Ethan couldn't move. He couldn't hear anything but the hollow thud of his own heartbeat. Then, just as they pulled him free, a whisper cut through the air. Not from Thunder, from the speakers overhead. One sentence, low and slow. Begin whisper test. Subject W672D. Override Protocol 7C. Ethan's blood turned cold. "Don't!" he screamed. "He's not ready. He's hurt." But they didn't listen, because this was no longer about healing. This was about control. The whisper test was a myth, a term buried in off-the-record reports about B-32's earliest animal conditioning methods. Not sound-based training, but psychological pulse induction. Ultrasonic commands delivered so softly, so surgically, that subjects couldn't tell whether the instruction came from inside their own mind. In other words, make the horse think it wants to obey. It was banned in 2017 under the Geneva Neural Accord after multiple canine units suffered psychogenic seizures in field tests. But apparently, B-32 had kept it, and now they were running it on Thunder. The med van roared through the canyon, sirens off. Karen sat across from Ethan, holding a cold compress to his cheek. His wheelchair had been torn, frame warped from the heat of the blast. But he didn't care. All he could think about was Thunder. Strapped inside the second van, wired to a new interface. Head lowered not from submission, but from fatigue, betrayal, confusion. "They're reprogramming him," Ethan whispered. "They're taking everything we built and turning it into a loop they can sell." Karen's eyes brimmed with tears. "Then we break it." By the time they reached the Ecotech containment site, formerly a Cold War listening post retrofitted into a biometric lab, it was already night. Vance met them at the gates. No smug smile this time. No tailored suit. Just tired eyes and a clipboard. "You should be dead," he said to Ethan. "You still might be," Karen muttered beside him. Vance sighed. "I didn't authorize the whisper test. That was above me. DARPA's Behavioral Sync Division took jurisdiction after the blackout." Ethan's voice shook. "He wasn't yours to give." "Neither were you," Vance replied. "But here we are." He handed Ethan a badge. "Level 1 access. You want to help your horse? You've got one chance left." Thunder was sedated, not unconscious, but still. His breathing slow, monitored. The pattern lit up in teal across 5 screens. Pulse, 44 BPM. Neural tension, 18%. Cortical resonance, unstable. But his eyes were open. And when Ethan rolled into the chamber, they followed him. Vance stood in the observation booth. "You'll speak through the mic," he said. "No touch, no cues. The protocol listens for natural linguistic trigger points. If he responds, we isolate the spike. If not..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan heard it anyway. "Then we wipe the slate." The door sealed shut. A red light clicked on, and the countdown began. Ethan sat alone in the sound chamber. Thunder watched him, head slightly tilted, as if searching for the familiar beneath the sterile smell of wires and antiseptic. Ethan took a breath and whispered, "It's me." No movement. He leaned forward. "You don't have to remember the tests, the pain, the collar, just this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the frayed rope, the old halter. He held it up to the glass. "You chewed through this your first day. Remember? They said you were untrainable." Thunder blinked. "You weren't." Another breath. "You were just free." The lights flickered. One of the monitors spiked. "Neural echo detected," Vance muttered. "Proceed." Ethan closed his eyes, then whispered one word. "Stay." Thunder didn't flinch, didn't move, but his ears turned, slightly. The scientist in the booth leaned forward. "Repeat that," Vance said. "Stay," Ethan repeated, Not because they say, because we do. Another spike. Thunder exhaled, long, deep, and then he stepped forward, one hoof, then two, until he reached the glass and lowered his head, exactly where Ethan had been sitting. "Son of a," someone in the booth whispered. "That's it. That's the bond loop." But Ethan wasn't done. He leaned forward again and whispered, "Now leave." Thunder blinked, turned his head, slowly, to the side. "Leave," Ethan said again. "If this is your choice, walk out." The door wasn't open, but Thunder turned away from him and faced the gate. He didn't move, didn't charge, just faced it, waiting for it to open, because trust wasn't about obedience, it was about freedom. The system glitched, red lights flickered, one of the biometric cuffs shorted out, and for one terrifying second, the door clicked. Then alarms blared. "Abort!" someone screamed. "He's trying to override!" The room plunged into darkness. When the backup lights flickered on, Ethan was on the floor, pulled from the chair in the chaos. Thunder? Gone. The door was wide open, not broken, just open, because someone had let him go. Vance stormed in, screaming at the guards, but Ethan knew it wasn't sabotage, it was trust, executed in silence. And somewhere, in the canyon beyond the lab walls, hooves vanished into the wind once more. Not fleeing, choosing. If you've ever had to whisper instead of shout just to be heard, drop a number 9 in the comments, because next time, the world won't be whispering, it'll be watching. They didn't call it a trial, they called it a public hearing. But the building was a federal courthouse. The metal detectors still beeped, the bailiffs still wore sidearms, and the judge, Miriam Black, still wielded the kind of silence that could stop a nation. Ethan wheeled through the marble entrance as cameras flashed from behind the barricades. He didn't wave, he didn't smile. His fingers curled around the frayed rope in his lap, the one piece of thunder he refused to give up. Karen walked beside him, jaw set. Preston Lee, their attorney, followed with a leather binder under one arm and a quiet fury in his step. Inside, the courtroom was full. Government officials from Ecotech's Behavioral Sync Division, a B-32 protocol advisor, military-grade consultants from the Defense Advanced Recognition Agency, and a handful of silent observers from the Department of Bioethics Compliance, watching, recording, not speaking. At the center of it all, Ethan versus the system. Not just a boy in a chair, a symbol they didn't want to work. Because if this worked, if trust worked, it would ruin everything they had built. "Court is now in session," the clerk said, voice thin. Judge Black nodded without speaking. Her eyes were sharp, her gavel untouched. Then the first witness was called, not by the defense, by Ecotech. Dr. Julian Vance took the stand. Again, only this time he looked tired, not broken, but bruised by something he couldn't quite name. "Dr. Vance," the prosecutor began, "you were the lead behavioral scientist overseeing Project W672D, correct?" "I was." "Did you authorize the subject's unsupervised interaction with Mr. Ethan Cole?" "No." "Did you later observe that interaction in violation of B-32 Behavioral Protocol 7.6a? "I did." "And your conclusion?" Vance looked up. "He formed a connection we couldn't predict, one we couldn't replicate, one we underestimated." Murmurs in the gallery. The prosecutor blinked. "So you're admitting this bond exists?" "I'm saying it wasn't designed. And that scares people who build systems for control." The courtroom froze. Judge Black raised one eyebrow. "Continue." The prosecutor recovered. "Did you or did you not recommend containment protocol under Clause 46A? "I was told to. I disagreed." "Objection," Preston interjected. "Coercion implies legal duress. That's not been established." "Sustained," the judge said, but her pen tapped slowly against her notepad. Preston rose from his seat. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to call our first and only witness." "Proceed." Ethan wheeled forward. The courtroom was dead silent. Only the faint hum of the overhead lights remained. Preston asked one question. "Mr. Cole, why are you here?" Ethan took a breath and whispered, "Because they think silence means surrender." He turned toward the judge. "And it doesn't." He told them everything. From the accident, to the first time he saw Thunder, to the moment the Stallion knelt, not out of submission, but trust. He described the day they took Thunder to B-32, the collar, the drone, the lawsuit filed under Clause 46A, branding him as a public threat because a wild horse had chosen him over containment. And then, he did something no one expected. He submitted a recording. It wasn't of Thunder kneeling. It wasn't even visual. It was audio. A single, unedited clip from the whisper test chamber, where Thunder, injured and wired, had moved, softly, toward Ethan's voice. "You don't have to stay," the recording played. "Only if you choose to." A pause, then a quiet breath, the sound of hooves, and the faintest creak of the glass where Thunder had rested his head. The courtroom didn't move for 30 seconds. Then a reporter in the gallery began to cry. Judge Black leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, are you asking the court to recognize this as what, exactly?" "Not ownership," Ethan said. "Not a right." He gripped the rope in his lap tighter. "A bond," the prosecutor returned with fury. He questioned Ethan's credibility, his age, his lack of training. He called Thunder's behavior a coincidental anomaly and accused Ethan of exploiting a neuro-instability pattern for emotional manipulation. "Do you deny you incited national panic by triggering a neural override response in a Tier 4 classified subject?" he barked. Ethan didn't flinch. "I deny ever forcing Thunder to do anything. Isn't it true you whispered a trigger phrase during the whisper test?" "It wasn't a command." "Then what was it?" Ethan looked up. "A choice." The room fell still again. Outside, the world waited. Inside, Vance stood again, this time unprompted. "I'd like to submit evidence," he said. Judge Black blinked. "You've already testified." "Not this." He held up a sealed drive. "Project Mirror Echo, neural test reports from B-32 Subnode 3, footage, metadata, and internal memos proving Thunder responded only to Ethan Cole, not to replication attempts, not to induced loops, only to organic voice." The prosecutor shouted. "That evidence was classified and declassified under federal whistleblower protection 2 hours ago," Vance snapped. Gasps filled the room. Judge Black tapped her gavel once. "Upload it." Screens lit up. Videos of failed test subjects, machines trying to mimic Ethan's voice, everyone ending the same way. Thunder turning away, shutting down. One video, dated 3:14 a.m., showed Thunder lifting his head briefly, only when Ethan's real voice echoed from a hidden speaker. Even in silence, Thunder knew. He chose, every time. The judge didn't recess. She sat back in her chair for 20 full minutes reviewing the files. Then she looked at Ethan. "Mr. Cole," she said, "under Clause 46A, this court was asked to determine whether your bond with Subject W672D constituted a behavioral threat to public safety. Do you believe it does?" Ethan looked across the room, past the wires, past the politics, past the fear. "No. I believe Thunder's trust was the safest thing in this entire system." Judge Black nodded once. Then she turned to the gallery. "This court finds no evidence of malicious intent, behavioral manipulation, or unsafe conduct in the actions of Ethan Cole. All charges under Clause 46A are dismissed." Cheers broke out, but were quickly silenced by her hand. "However," she looked to Ecotech's counsel, "the court finds Ecotech in breach of the 2007 Neuroethics Accord, including illegal whisper test continuance, and orders an immediate audit of B-32 operations. All animal containment subjects are to be released to third-party behavioral sanctuaries pending review." She banged the gavel once. "This hearing is adjourned." Outside, Ethan didn't speak. He didn't have to. Reporters flooded the stairs, but none of them could match the sound of what came next. Hooves, thunder. Walking slowly through the outer security gate, released by the Oversight Committee 10 minutes prior. No halter, no rope, just a silent walk toward one person. And Ethan, from his chair, whispered just one word. Home. If you believe silence can speak louder than any courtroom, drop a number 10. Because the verdict wasn't written on paper. It was written in trust. He didn't know why he went back. The trial was over. The charges dropped. Thunder was legally free. The last of B-32's collars melted down and publicly decommissioned. But something in Ethan needed to stand in the place where it had all begun. Not the arena where Thunder first bowed, not the courthouse steps, not even the lab where whisper tests had failed, but the field. That forgotten patch of Nevada dirt where no one had been watching, where no one clapped, where trust had first spoken, not loud, but true. It was 6:12 a.m. when he wheeled out of the cabin. No cameras, no speeches, no fences, just open grass, one horse, and one boy. Karen had left the porch light on, a silent way of saying, "Take your time." Thunder was already in the center of the field, head lowered, grazing slowly under the pale orange sky. Ethan didn't call out. Didn't need to. The stallion looked up the moment he heard the gravel crunch beneath the chair tires. One long breath. Then, he walked. No saddle, no ropes, no regulators, just instinct and silence. Ethan met him halfway. Neither of them moved for a full minute. Until Thunder nudged Ethan's shoulder just once. And Ethan laughed. "I missed you too." But peace doesn't last long when the world hasn't decided what it believes in yet. The first email came at 10:03 a.m. from a private defense contractor called Hollow Bridge Systems based in Virginia. Subject, adaptive bonding proposal. The body of the email, "What you've done isn't just extraordinary, it's replicable. We believe Thunder's neural adaptation when bonded through real trauma reveals an undiscovered framework for loyalty simulation, particularly in unstructured environments. Let's talk." Attached, a $275,000 collaboration incentive and a proposed patent draft titled BioSync Loop Trigger via Live Trust Replication, LS7. Ethan deleted it, but more came, 7 by lunchtime. By the time Karen returned from town, there were 16, all from companies with names like Intercent Solutions, Mara Behavioral Risk Group, and one tagged Red Clover Initiative, Bioethics Tier 4 Clearance, all using different words for the same thing. We saw what Thunder did. We want it. We want to sell it. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he went back to the field. Thunder was pacing again, his usual rhythm when he sensed something approaching. Karen met Ethan at the edge. "You need to see this." He followed her inside. On the news, a congressional subcommittee hearing had been scheduled to review the shutdown of B-32. One senator, an ex-lobbyist for biometric defense, was demanding a new framework. He called it the field of one protocol. "We need clarity," the man said. "What happened between that boy and that animal can't just be allowed to become folklore. If trust can be taught, it can be regulated." A pause. "And if it can't be taught, then it must be isolated, for national safety." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Are they talking about me?" Karen's voice was low. "They're talking about owning what you proved." By sundown, they made a decision. They would leave. Not disappear, but relocate Thunder to Field 11, an unlisted pasture managed by Hank's friend in Wyoming. No cameras, no contracts, no government watching from the hill. "I don't want to run," Ethan said. "You're not running," Karen replied. "You're protecting. There's a difference." They packed quietly. Only what mattered: the old rope halter, a few notebooks, the broken collar from the courthouse, a reminder, and one USB drive. It contained the only full recording of the whisper test session. the one where Thunder had walked forward and then away. "I want people to see this," Ethan whispered. "Someday. But not now." "No," he said. "Not yet." They loaded Thunder at 4:45 a.m. By 6:02, they were crossing the state line. No one followed, or so they thought. It happened outside Rawlins. An unmarked SUV, black windows, no tags. Karen noticed first. "I've taken this highway for 20 years. That car's not local." Ethan checked the side mirror. The SUV sped up, then slowed again. Karen's voice dropped. "They're waiting for us to stop." They didn't. But 20 miles later, the SUV turned off on a gravel road. Gone. Karen gripped the wheel tighter. "They're not done. They're just watching." They arrived at Field 11 just after nightfall. Thunder stepped into the new grass like he'd been born there. The land was wide, flat, and quiet, backed by low hills and an old wooden barn with no cameras, no electric gates. Hank was already there. He looked older than Ethan remembered, but his hands were steady as ever. "You made it." "We weren't sure we would." Hank nodded. "It's not over." "I know." He handed Ethan a folded sheet of paper. "Just got this from a contact in D.C. It was a briefing memo. Top line, recommendation, revive B-32 under new directive. New title, Field of One. Project lead TBD. Asset, W672D, and bonded subject, Cole, Ethan. Ethan felt the wind vanish from his chest. They want to start it again? They want to own it differently. The next week passed in pieces. Thunder adjusted well, more than well. He ran again, slept without pacing, ate calmly, no tremors. But Ethan didn't. Each night he sat on the porch, rope halter in hand, staring into the dark field. He thought of the trial. The words they used, neuroinstability, behavioral deviation, Clause 46A. He thought of Vance, how he had started as an enemy, how he'd ended up, not a friend, but a bridge. And he thought of one terrifying truth. If a bond like theirs could exist once, it could exist again, and someone out there would try to manufacture it, even if it meant breaking others to do it. On the 8th day, the email came. Not to Ethan, to Karen, from a blocked sender. No subject, one image. It was Thunder, standing alone in a field. Only it wasn't Field 11. It was a replica, same fencing, same grass type, same dimensions, but not their field. A message was embedded in the bottom corner. "We've recreated the environment. Now all we need is the boy." Karen dropped her phone. Ethan caught it. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, "They're testing clones." Karen's eyes widened. "You think they're trying to make another Thunder without the trust?" "No," Ethan said coldly. "They're trying to make me without the will." That night, Ethan went back to the field. Thunder stood near the far fence, eyes watching the stars. Ethan walked beside him. No rope, no harness. He laid a hand against the stallion's neck. "I need to tell them." Thunder didn't move. "I need the world to see what real trust looks like, so they can't just twist it into wires and patents." A pause. "Not just for us, for whoever comes next." Thunder exhaled, slow, and Ethan knew he had to go back, not to the courtroom, but to everyone. If you've ever had to choose between safety and standing alone, drop a number 11. Because the world is building replicas, but there's still only one Field of One. The letter arrived on a Monday. No signature, no seal. Just a white envelope slipped under the door of the Wyoming field office, addressed in uneven block letters. Julian Cole. Confidential response required inside wasn't a threat. It was a challenge, an invitation. A single page, laser-printed, marked Discretionary Freestyle Showcase, International Adaptive Trust Trials. Bottom line, we believe you and subject W672D are the only pair capable of completing Course 0. Unmodified, no reins, no saddle, no remote assist, just one field, one voice, one finish line. Karen read it 3 times. Is this a trap? Julian didn't answer immediately, because part of him thought, maybe, but part of him knew better. Because the arena listed wasn't a government site, wasn't B32, wasn't Ecotech. It was Geneva, not a trial, a test. And this time, it would be on his terms. For the first time in 2 years, Julian rolled towards something without needing to look back. No surveillance vans, no embedded tech, no whispered override codes from underground labs. Just thunder beside him, calm as dusk, his breath steady, every step deliberate. They arrived in Switzerland under diplomatic clearance granted by the Geneva Ethics Assembly. Field Z0 was nothing like the others. It was massive, flat, unbroken, surrounded by snow-capped silence, no fencing, no spectators near the ring, just a small tribunal seated under a canvas awning, bioethics judges, trauma response clinicians, a retired military psychologist from NATO, and one seat left empty. Reserved, the translator said, for subject W672D, not as a specimen, as a witness. Julian grinned. They're finally getting it. The rules were simple and impossible. There would be no physical communication, no tools, no vocal commands above 10 decibels. The path through the arena would include a narrow corridor bordered by high-frequency emitters, simulating urban dissonance, a sudden blast of scent-triggered memory zones, mimicking field trauma recall, a finish line rigged with an open gate and a false one, to test choice under pressure. If Thunder walked calmly through the correct sequence, alone, without force, it would confirm everything Julian had claimed. If he didn't, the old world would return. Clause 46A would be reactivated, and the silence would once again be labeled unstable. Julian stood outside the ring alone. Thunder was already in the start chamber, his vitals broadcasting to the ethics monitors via a collar Julian himself had rewired, removing B-32's tracking relay, keeping only the heartbeat sensor. He adjusted his wheelchair's position. His palms were sweating, not from fear, but from knowing this was the moment no one could rehearse, not even trust. The start gate lifted. Thunder stepped forward. The corridor of high-frequency sound was brutal. Not loud, but sharp, layered with frequencies dogs couldn't stand. Embedded between the static were echoes from earlier tests. Julian's voice cut and spliced. Stay. Go. Turn back. The judges watched carefully, but Thunder didn't flinch. Because Thunder wasn't listening to echoes. He was listening for something else. Julian didn't move, didn't speak, but he whispered in his mind what he had said all those months ago in a government cage. You don't have to stay. You choose. Thunder moved forward, deliberate. The second obstacle was harder. A scent cannon sprayed mist from behind the metal barricade. Biological olfactory memory triggers, designed in Lab B32, smells from trauma sites, burnt hay, blood, chemical adhesive from neural caps. Julian winced. He remembered the burns, the restraints, the scent of leather soaked in antiseptic during the whisper test. And Thunder? He hesitated. Not for long, but enough. His ears twitched. His front hoof pawed the dirt. Julian leaned forward, not shouting, just whispering under his breath. You're not there anymore. Thunder looked left, then right, then forward, and walked again. The final trial wasn't physical, it was moral. 2 gates, identical. One led to Julian, the other led to silence. One was open, the other would lock shut behind him, and they would never meet again. This was the part Ecotech had warned would never work. Animals don't choose. But Thunder wasn't just any animal. He stood still for a full 20 seconds. The wind picked up. The snow shifted. The judges whispered. Julian didn't breathe. And then, Thunder turned left. Toward the open gate. Then stopped, backed up, looked again, and turned right, to the false gate. It clicked as he stepped through, and locked behind him. Julian's heart dropped, but then thunder backed out, hooves scraping steel. The lock buckled, and then he kicked it down, not because it was wrong, because it was chosen. He walked back to the real gate, through, to Julian, and the world erupted. The Geneva Ethics Tribunal didn't just approve the result, they did something no one had expected. They passed a formal resolution that sentient bio-bonds of trust may not be subjected to override extraction, simulation replication, or commercial appropriation under penalty of international violation per Article 6, Subclause 7, Behavioral Autonomy Protection. They called it the Thunder Clause. And Julian? He walked away, not with a trophy, but with a seat at the table, literally. He was offered a rotating chair on the ethics committee. He declined. Instead, he sent in a handwritten reply, 5 words, "Let Thunder have the seat." Back in Wyoming, Karen met him at the barn. She didn't say much, just handed him the latest mail. 1 envelope, stamped Veterans Affairs, Department of Tech Recovery. Inside was a folded memo. It detailed the official shutdown of B-32's last site. All biometric research under Directive 46A officially declassified, lab dismantled, device archives secured by independent audit teams, final biometric collar melted per Geneva compliance order. Attached, 1 melted piece of metal, and a single note. You were right. Julian placed it next to the old halter on the wall. They could have stopped there, but they didn't. Because people started writing. Not journalists, children, veterans, therapists, parents, all asking the same thing. How did you teach him to trust again? And Julian replied with the only truth that mattered. I didn't. I let him decide. A year later, Julian and Thunder returned to Silver Ridge, not to perform, to teach. The Freestyle Trust Clinic opened its doors with no funding, no tech sponsors, and no audience. Just 1 horse and 1 boy, and a growing number of kids in wheelchairs, who believed they could speak without yelling, who believed silence wasn't weakness, who learned that even the strongest creatures pause before they trust. On the first day, one girl asked him, "What if the horse doesn't listen?" Julian smiled. "Then we wait." The girl nodded, then whispered, "I'll wait too." On the day Thunder passed, 6 years later, he didn't cry. He didn't post about it. He didn't speak for a full 3 days. Then, on the 4th morning, Julian walked alone out to the field. He stood in the exact spot where they first trained, just him and silence. And then, from his jacket, he pulled out the old halter and placed it in the dirt, then turned away. Not in mourning, in gratitude. Because Thunder never needed reins, never needed permission, just a whisper and a chance. If you believe some endings don't belong to silence, drop a number 12, because sometimes the real finish line is when you let go and they still choose to walk beside you. Sometimes the loudest revolutions don't come from a microphone, they begin with a whisper. Julian didn't set out to prove anything. He wasn't chasing a medal, a trial verdict, or a headline. All he wanted, after the accident, after the pain, after the silence, was to feel like he still mattered. Like there was a version of himself beyond what the world had labeled as broken. And then Thunder walked into his life, untamed, unwilling, unapologetically free. A creature that mirrored the chaos Julian felt inside. And yet, somehow, through quiet moments, soft eyes, and no expectations, they found each other. Not through dominance, or commands, or conditioning, but through trust. Real trust. The kind that can't be replicated in a lab or monetized into a protocol. And in that fragile space between a boy in a chair and a horse once considered dangerous, a powerful truth emerged. Trust isn't built. It's offered. And if you're lucky, it's returned. This story isn't just about a boy and a horse. It's about all of us. About how our world, so driven by systems, algorithms, biometrics, artificial intelligence, often forgets the value of raw, imperfect human connection. We've learned how to simulate emotions, replicate memories, and predict behaviors with frightening precision. Technologies once confined to secret labs like B32 now power your phone, your medical records, even your education. But no machine, no neural interface, no AI-powered assistant has ever learned what Julian and Thunder proved with nothing but breath, eye contact, and time. That trust doesn't scale, it doesn't obey, and it cannot be hacked. In a society obsessed with control over data, bodies, outcomes, this story dares to suggest something deeply uncomfortable. What if letting go gives us more power than holding on? Because in the end, Thunder wasn't tamed. He chose. And maybe that's the part that scares institutions the most. Because if one wild horse can decide to trust a broken boy despite every scientific prediction, then maybe we're wrong about other things too. Maybe real loyalty can't be programmed. Maybe healing doesn't follow a timeline. Maybe vulnerability isn't weakness. And maybe, just maybe, the strongest partnerships don't come from contracts or codes, but from something far simpler. A willingness to stay, even when every instinct tells you to run. This story challenges the assumption that trust must be earned through performance or obedience. It challenges the way we look at rehabilitation, at disability, at trauma. It asks us to rethink the labels we slap on people and creatures who don't fit the model. In a world rushing toward AI-driven behavioral correction, neurofeedback performance enhancement, and emotional pattern regulation, Julian's journey is a vital pause, a moment to ask, what happens when a bond refuses to follow the algorithm? What happens when silence wins? And more importantly, what kind of world are we building if we no longer leave space for choice? Maybe you've felt like Julian, like no one hears you unless you shout, like people only respect what they can measure or monetize. But here's the truth he proved, without ever raising his voice. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be perfect to be chosen. You just need to show up, consistently, quietly, and fully present, and trust that someone or something will meet you halfway. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a moment where you had to whisper your truth, hoping the right heart would hear it? If yes, you're not alone. If this story touched you, challenged you, or reminded you of something you've forgotten, leave a number 5 in the comments below. And share this story, because maybe someone out there needs to know that trust isn't dead, that even in a world run by tech, connection still wins. And if you believe that freedom begins not with control, but with choice, then maybe we haven't crossed the finish line yet. Maybe we've only just begun.